I was 31 years old when my father looked me in the eyes, smiled at 200 guests, and announced that I had been the biggest mistake he and my mother had ever made. Not their worst financial decision, not their biggest disappointment, their biggest mistake. Then he handed me the keys to a $2 million mansion and ordered me to give them to my younger sister while everyone applauded. If you had asked anyone standing in that ballroom who deserved everything our family owned, every single one of them would have pointed at Vanessa. She was beautiful, charismatic, and knew exactly how to make people believe she had earned every luxury she enjoyed. I was the invisible daughter, the one who supposedly worked too much, the one who never appreciated family, the one my parents loved introducing with backhanded compliments. "This is Amber," my mother would say with that polished smile that fooled everyone outside our home. "She's independent. She prefers work over people." It always sounded harmless, until you lived with what those words actually meant. Because while Vanessa spent weekends shopping in New York and posting luxury vacations online, I spent mine fixing problems inside more logistics. Problems nobody even knew existed. Problems that somehow always became my responsibility. Without a paycheck, without a title, without a single thank you. And still, according to my parents, I was the mistake. The ballroom overlooked Lake Michigan. Crystal chandeliers reflected against enormous glass walls, while waiters carried champagne that cost more than my monthly rent. A jazz quartet played near the stage. A massive banner hung behind the podium. "Congratulations, Vanessa. Your future starts today." My future apparently wasn't worth mentioning. I adjusted the sleeve of my navy blue dress as another guest walked past me without saying hello. Most of them didn't even realize I was Dylan and Cadence Moore's oldest daughter. That wasn't an accident. My parents preferred it that way. Vanessa was already surrounded by photographers, influencers, business partners, and family friends, laughing loudly as she showed off the designer bracelet my mother had given her before dinner. "Limited edition," Cadence announced proudly for the 5th time. "Only 50 were made." Vanessa kissed her cheek dramatically. "Oh, Mom, you spoil me." Cadence laughed. "You deserve every bit of it." Then her eyes landed on me. For barely a second, long enough to remind me I had arrived alone. Again, she walked over holding 2 champagne glasses. She handed one to Vanessa. Without even slowing down, she walked straight past me. "Amber," she said casually, "the staff entrance is on the other side if you're looking for coffee." 3 executives standing nearby laughed. Not loudly, just enough. Exactly the kind of laugh designed to make someone feel smaller without creating a scene. I smiled politely. It annoyed her every time I refused to react. Because that's what my mother wanted. Not an argument. A performance. She wanted everyone to watch me lose control. I never gave her that satisfaction. Vanessa noticed. She walked over carrying her champagne. "You know," she whispered just loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear. "I almost felt bad inviting you." She looked me up and down. But every perfect party needs someone people can compare themselves to. A few more smiles. Another uncomfortable laugh. Someone pretended not to hear. Someone else definitely did. I simply looked at her. "You finished." Her smile faltered for half a second. Then she laughed louder than before. "There she is. Our serious little sister. Our family project that never paid off." She walked away before I answered. She didn't need the last word. She thought she already had it. The lights dimmed. The music stopped. A spotlight illuminated the stage. My father climbed the stairs wearing the same tailored tuxedo he reserved for moments he considered historic. Tonight, apparently qualified, he thanked investors. He thanked friends. He thanked employees. He thanked Vanessa. Then he looked toward me. "I have 2 daughters." The room became silent. One taught me that life rewards confidence. Applause. He smiled proudly at Vanessa. "The other," he paused long enough for every eye in the ballroom to find mine, "taught me that not every investment succeeds." Soft laughter spread across the room. "I love both my daughters." Another pause. "But if I could change one decision I made 31 years ago," he smiled, "I'd probably avoid my biggest mistake." The room exploded with laughter. My stomach tightened, not because of his words, because I realized he had rehearsed them. This wasn't anger. It wasn't emotion. It was entertainment. I watched business partners, neighbors, family friends, people who had known me since childhood, laugh while my father enjoyed every second of it. Then two attendants rolled a silk-covered pedestal onto the stage. Dylan removed the cloth with theatrical excitement. A polished wooden box rested underneath. Inside were the keys to Vanessa's new mansion. The audience applauded before he even opened it. He looked directly at me. Amber. His voice echoed through the ballroom. Come up here. Every instinct told me not to move. But 200 people had already turned toward me. So I walked. Slowly. Calmly. Exactly the way they hated. When I reached the stage, my father placed the box in my hands. Then leaned closer and whispered something only I could hear. At least you'll know what success looks like before you go back to your apartment. He stepped back, smiled at the audience, then handed me the microphone. Go ahead. Give your sister what she actually deserves. I turned toward Vanessa. She wasn't looking at the keys. She was looking at me, waiting, hoping I would finally break. At that exact moment, my phone vibrated inside my purse. I glanced at the screen. The caller ID showed a name I hadn't seen in almost 3 years. Margaret Collins. And somehow, before I even answered, I knew that everything my parents believed they controlled was about to begin falling apart. I didn't answer Margaret's call. Not immediately. I silenced my phone, slipped it back into my purse, and forced myself to smile while extending the polished wooden box toward Vanessa. She accepted it with theatrical excitement, lifting the keys above her head as if she had just won an Olympic medal. The ballroom erupted into applause. Camera flashes exploded from every direction. Vanessa wrapped both arms around Dylan. I knew you'd never let me down. I always knew I was your favorite. My father laughed without the slightest embarrassment. You earned it. No one questioned those words. No one asked how a 28-year-old woman who had never kept the same job for longer than 6 months had somehow earned a mansion overlooking Lake Michigan. No one except me, because I knew exactly where the money had come from. Not from record profits. Not from brilliant leadership. Certainly not from Vanessa. The company had survived the last 4 years because every crisis had quietly landed on my desk before anyone else even knew it existed. Failed software migrations, cybersecurity breaches, contract disputes, vendor fraud, federal compliance updates. Every time more logistics stood on the edge of disaster. I was the person keeping it alive. Invisible work. Invisible victories. Invisible daughter. Vanessa hugged our mother next. Cadence wiped away fake tears while photographers captured what she later called the proudest moment of her life. Then she spotted me, standing alone near the stage. She frowned. Amber. People nearby instinctively looked toward us. She smiled as if she were about to compliment me. Would you ask one of the waiters to bring another bottle of champagne? She tilted her head. They're busy. You aren't. Several guests laughed. Again. Not because it was funny. Because nobody wanted to be the first person who didn't laugh with the Moors. I looked directly at her. There are at least 15 waiters here. And none of them are my daughter. Her smile never moved. But since you've contributed so little to tonight, you can contribute that. Another wave of quiet laughter. Vanessa raised her glass. Come on, Amber. Don't ruin my party. I held her gaze for another second, then walked away, not toward the waiters, toward the exit. Behind me, I heard Cadence's voice sharpen. Amber. I kept walking. She hated that even more than arguments. Silence. Outside, the cool Chicago air hit my face. The music from the ballroom became a dull echo behind the heavy doors. Only then did I return Margaret's call. She answered before the first ring finished. I was beginning to think you'd ignore me. I almost did. I assumed your father's speech went exactly as planned. I closed my eyes. You watched. I never miss predictable people. That sounded exactly like Margaret. 3 years earlier, she had retired after spending decades restructuring billion-dollar corporations. Most executives feared her. I respected her. She had once told me something I never forgot. The loudest executive in the room usually understands the least. At the time, I thought she was talking about business. Now I understood she had been talking about people. I have something for you, she continued. Something I think you've waited years to see. What is it? Not over the phone. She paused. Can you meet tomorrow morning? I hesitated. My parents expect me at the office. They expect free labor. There's a difference. That made me smile despite everything. I'll make time. You'll want to. Before hanging up, she added one final sentence. The first domino just fell. She disconnected. I stared at the dark screen. Margaret never exaggerated. If she said something had started, it already had. The following morning I arrived at More Logistics before 7. Exactly like every weekday. The receptionist smiled warmly. Good morning, Ms. Moore. She still called me Ms. Moore. Everyone else inside the company called Vanessa future CEO. That difference wasn't accidental. It was earned. As I stepped into the operations department, 3 managers were already waiting outside my office. Not Vanessa's office. Mine. Amber. One of them looked exhausted. The shipment management system crashed again. Another handed me a folder. Customs rejected 17 containers overnight. A third lowered his voice. And accounting found another billing inconsistency. I hadn't even put my bag down. Problems were already stacking on my desk. I spent the next 3 hours solving issues that would have cost the company millions if ignored for another day. No meetings. No announcements. No applause. Just work. Around 10:30, loud laughter echoed across the hallway. Vanessa had arrived. Nearly 4 hours late. She walked through the office carrying designer sunglasses in one hand and an expensive coffee in the other. Behind her followed 2 photographers, filming content for social media. First day running Dad's company, she announced dramatically. Several employees forced polite smiles. Others immediately returned to their computers. They knew the truth. They simply couldn't say it. Vanessa stopped beside my desk. So, she looked around at everyone. I've decided we're making a few changes. Nobody answered. She continued anyway. Starting today, every department reports directly to me. One manager carefully cleared his throat. Operational approvals currently require Amber's authorization. Vanessa smiled. Not anymore. She reached across my desk, picked up the access badge hanging beside my keyboard, and placed it on top of a folder. This office is too large for someone who just fixes problems. You won't need executive clearance anymore. The room became completely silent. Every manager looked at me, waiting, wondering if this was finally the moment I exploded. Instead, I slowly removed my employee badge, placed it beside the executive one, then calmly slid both across the desk toward Vanessa. If you're taking responsibility, I won't stand in your way. She laughed. Oh, I wasn't asking. I know. I stood, picked up my purse, and walked out of the office. Behind me, no one noticed the single system notification quietly disappearing from my computer screen. The automatic security updates scheduled for midnight would no longer be deployed, and only one person inside More Logistics knew what would happen when it failed. I didn't return to my office. For the first time in nearly 6 years, I simply walked past it. Behind the glass walls, I could already hear Vanessa's voice filling the department. She wasn't asking questions. She was giving orders, confidently, loudly, about systems she had never used, about contracts she had never read, about employees whose names she didn't even know. I stepped into the elevator without looking back. 3 managers watched me leave. None of them tried to stop me, not because they wanted me gone, because they had just realized something terrifying. For years, they hadn't depended on More Logistics. They had depended on me. My phone rang before I reached the parking garage. It was Ethan, director of operations, one of the few executives who had never treated me like an assistant. Amber, his voice was lower than usual. Did you really hand over executive access? I did. A long silence. You know, she just approved the cancellation of the emergency monitoring contracts. I know. Those systems protect every distribution center. I know. They're expensive. They're necessary. Another pause. Should I stop her? I leaned against my car. Every instinct inside me wanted to say yes, because that's what I had done for years. Every reckless decision, every impulsive purchase, every disastrous contract, every ego-driven mistake made by my father always landed on my desk before it became public. I had spent years preventing disasters no one even knew existed. Not anymore. No. I finally answered. Follow her instructions. He almost whispered. Amber, this could become catastrophic. It probably will. And you're just going to watch? I closed my eyes. I've spent 6 years making sure nobody learned what happens when they ignore my advice. It's time they learn. When the call ended, I sat inside my car without turning the engine on. It felt wrong. Every professional instinct I had was screaming for me to go back upstairs, to fix everything, to save everyone. Then I remembered my father's words. My biggest mistake. My mother's smile. Vanessa raising those house keys while 200 people applauded. No, they didn't want my work. They wanted my silence. Now, they had both. Margaret's office occupied the entire top floor of a quiet building overlooking the Chicago River. No logo, no luxury reception, no unnecessary decoration, just efficiency, exactly like her. She greeted me with a brief smile before sliding a thick folder across the conference table. I've been collecting this for almost 18 months. I looked down. Every page carried the More Logistics logo. Internal reports, risk analyses, financial projections, emails, signed approvals, documents I had never seen before. What is this? Everything your father refused to show you. I turned another page, then another. My heartbeat slowed, not from fear, from recognition. Entire sections of the company had been operating at a loss for years. Several expansion projects were financed almost entirely with debt. Cash flow looked healthy, only because suppliers were being paid later and later. Margaret quietly watched me connect the pieces. They've been hiding this. They've been surviving. She corrected me. Those are different things. I continued reading, then stopped. A single document had been highlighted, projected revenue assuming. Amber Moore remains in operational leadership. I read it twice, 3 times. Every long-term projection depended on me staying exactly where I had always been. Invisible, unpaid, fixing everything. Without me, the report estimated operational failure within 12 to 18 months. Margaret folded her hands. Your father never noticed that page. How? He skipped straight to the profit projections. A bitter smile escaped me. Of course he did. She nodded. Arrogant leaders rarely read the parts written by people smarter than themselves. I looked up. So why are you showing me this now? Because yesterday, he officially removed the only variable keeping those projections alive. Silence filled the room. Then Margaret asked a question that stayed with me. Amber, if they spent years convincing everyone you were worthless, why are you still working so hard to protect their reputation? I didn't answer, because I didn't have one. Back at More Logistics, the consequences had already begun. Vanessa had ordered a complete restructuring meeting. Every department head sat around the conference table. She stood before a giant presentation screen. I've reviewed our expenses. She smiled proudly. We've been wasting millions on unnecessary operational safeguards. Several managers exchanged worried glances. She clicked to the next slide. Starting immediately, we're reducing cybersecurity, compliance audits, and emergency response contracts. One finance manager cautiously raised his hand. Amber implemented those after the federal inspection 3 years ago. Vanessa laughed. And somehow we're still here. Nobody laughed with her. She noticed. So, the manager swallowed. Those systems prevented 3 major disruptions last year. Vanessa shrugged. Then we'll prevent the 4th. She signed the approval without reading the final recommendation attached to the proposal. The recommendation, written by me, contained a single sentence. Removing these protections creates an unacceptable operational risk. She never reached that page. At 4:17 that afternoon, the first email arrived. Urgent. One of More Logistics' largest pharmaceutical clients had temporarily suspended all outgoing shipments. A security certification required by their contract could no longer be verified. The shipment was frozen. Millions of dollars stopped moving, with a single notification. And that was only the beginning. By 8 o'clock the next morning, the entire executive floor was in chaos. Phones rang without stopping. Managers crossed the hallway, carrying folders they hadn't touched in years. Conference room doors opened and slammed shut every few minutes. No one was smiling anymore. The pharmaceutical shipment that had been frozen overnight wasn't just another delayed order. It was More Logistics' largest contract. If it remained suspended, every other client would start asking the same question. What happened? Inside the boardroom, Dylan slammed both hands against the polished table. This is unacceptable. I want that shipment moving within the hour. No one answered. Not because they didn't want to. Because they couldn't. The compliance director carefully adjusted his glasses. The certification expired after the monitoring platform was discontinued. Dylan frowned. What monitoring platform? The one Vanessa authorized us to cancel yesterday. Every eye in the room slowly turned toward her. Vanessa forced an irritated laugh. So we're blaming me because one document expired? The compliance director inhaled deeply. No. We're blaming the cancellation of the automated renewal system. Silence. Vanessa looked around the room, expecting someone to defend her. Nobody did. She crossed her arms. Then renew it. It doesn't work like that. Why not? Because those certifications require external verification. How long? He hesitated. If everything goes perfectly. 3 weeks. The room fell completely silent. 3 weeks. 3 weeks without their largest client. 3 weeks of delayed deliveries. 3 weeks of rumors spreading through an industry that survived on reputation. Dylan's face slowly hardened. Who designed this system? The answer came immediately. Amber. My phone started vibrating while I was having breakfast in a small cafe across the river. I watched Dylan's name appear on the screen. Ignored it. 30 seconds later, he called again. Then Cadence. Then Vanessa. 5 missed calls became 9. 9 became 14. I calmly finished my coffee before answering. What? There wasn't even a greeting. Where the hell are you? Dylan's voice exploded through the speaker. Breakfast. Get to the office. No. A pause. Not because he hadn't heard me. Because I had never said that word to him before. What did you just say? I said no. You work for this company. I don't. You walked out yesterday. You removed my executive authority. You took my office. You took my access. You made your new executive very clear. His breathing became heavier. This isn't the time for your attitude. No. It isn't. It's the time for your CEO. I hung up. The phone rang again before I could place it on the table. Cadence. I answered. Her voice sounded softer than Dylan's, which usually meant she wanted something. Sweetheart. We're family. There it was. The sentence that only existed whenever they needed me. You know your father gets emotional. He didn't mean those things. I looked out the cafe window. I recorded his speech. Silence. He looked directly into the camera when he called me your biggest mistake. Another silence. Longer this time. Finally she whispered. You know how these events are. No. I know exactly how they are. You embarrass me. You humiliate me. And then you call it family. She abandoned the gentle tone immediately. Your sister made one mistake. Actually, I counted 7 before noon yesterday. Cadence ignored that. You've always cleaned these things up. That's what you do. Those 6 words landed harder than anything Dylan had said. That's what you do. Not. That's who you are. Not. We're proud of you. Not. Thank you. Just. The person who cleans up everyone else's mess. I quietly answered. Not anymore. Then I ended the call. Back at headquarters, panic was replacing arrogance. The pharmaceutical company had requested an emergency meeting. Not tomorrow. Not next week. That afternoon. Dylan adjusted his tie while Vanessa rehearsed excuses in front of the conference room mirror. We'll tell them this was a temporary technical issue. She smiled confidently. They don't need details. One of the senior account managers looked horrified. They specifically requested to meet the executive responsible for operational stability. Vanessa answered immediately. That's me. The manager didn't move. They didn't ask for the CEO. They asked for the person who built the operational framework. No one spoke. Everyone in that room knew exactly who that was. No one dared say her name first. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. They're asking for Amber. Vanessa laughed. They don't even know Amber. They know her. He replied calmly. They've just never met her. An hour later, I was sitting across from Margaret again. She placed another folder on the table. This one thinner. More important, the pharmaceutical company called me this morning. I looked up. They know you. They know my reputation. She smiled slightly. And now, they know yours. She slid a business card across the table. Harrison Whitaker, Chief Executive Officer. Northbridge Medical Distribution, one of the largest healthcare logistics companies in the Midwest. They've spent years wondering why more logistics always recovered faster than everyone else. They finally asked the right question. I picked up the card. Margaret watched my expression. They aren't interested in buying more logistics. She paused deliberately. They're interested in hiring the person who made it valuable. Before I could answer, my phone vibrated once more. This time, it wasn't Dylan. It wasn't Cadence. It wasn't Vanessa. It was Ethan. When I answered, he skipped every greeting. Amber. His voice was almost shaking. You need to know this. Dylan just walked into the conference room and told Northbridge that you were nothing more than an administrative assistant. I closed my eyes. Margaret smiled for the first time that day. Not because of the insult, because she already knew. That lie was about to become the biggest mistake Dylan Moore had ever made. The conference room remained silent long after Dylan finished speaking. Across the table, Harrison Whitaker didn't react. He simply closed the presentation folder that Vanessa had spent 20 minutes explaining. I'd like to ask one question. Dylan smiled confidently. Of course. Harrison looked around the room before speaking. Who built your operational continuity program? Vanessa answered before anyone else could. Our executive team. Harrison didn't even look at her. I didn't ask who approved it. I asked who built it. Another silence. Dylan folded his hands. Our departments work collaboratively. Harrison slowly nodded. I've been in this industry for 30 years. I know the difference between the person who signs reports and the person everyone calls when those reports fail. No one moved. No one dared answer. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. It was Amber. Vanessa immediately interrupted. She only coordinated small technical adjustments. Harrison finally turned toward her. Interesting. He opened a folder his assistant had placed beside him. Inside were incident reports covering the previous 5 years. Each one contained the same internal contact. Amber Moore. Cyberattack. Amber Moore. Federal inspection. Amber Moore. Hurricane contingency. Amber Moore. Warehouse fire. Amber Moore. Software recovery. Amber Moore. He slowly closed the folder again. So either your company has been lying to us for years, or someone in this room isn't telling me the truth today. No one answered, because nobody could. Nearly an hour later, I received another call from Ethan. This time his voice sounded completely different. They know. Know what? They know you built everything. I didn't respond. They brought copies of old incident reports. They've been documenting every crisis for years. And every report has your name. I leaned back in my chair. Margaret quietly watched me from across the office. So what happened? Dylan tried to say you were just administrative support. And he couldn't explain why every emergency contact listed you. A small smile crossed Margaret's face. Patterns. She whispered. They always betray the truth. Back inside more logistics. The meeting was falling apart. Vanessa refused to admit any responsibility. The shipment issue is already being resolved. Harrison calmly interrupted her. No, it isn't. He slid another document across the table. This morning, 3 hospitals reported delayed medication deliveries. Every executive around the table looked down. No one wanted to be the first person associated with that sentence. Delayed medicine wasn't a late furniture shipment. It wasn't office supplies. Patients depended on those deliveries. Harrison spoke again. My board asked me one question before I came here. He looked directly at Dylan. They wanted to know whether more logistics still had the same people protecting our network. Dylan forced a smile. We have an outstanding executive team. That wasn't my question. Another uncomfortable silence. Finally, Dylan admitted it. Amber is no longer involved. Harrison didn't even try to hide his disappointment. I thought so. He stood, gathered every document, buttoned his jacket. Vanessa looked confused. So, when do we discuss renewing the contract? He looked at her with complete indifference. We won't. Her smile disappeared. What? We don't renegotiate with companies that remove the people responsible for keeping our business alive. He started walking toward the door, then stopped. One final sentence. If Amber Moore ever starts her own company, tell her to call me first. The room froze, not because of what he said, Because everyone understood exactly what it meant. For the first time, someone outside More Logistics had publicly acknowledged what every employee already knew. Amber wasn't replaceable. She had been the company. When Ethan told me what Harrison had said, I remained silent. Margaret didn't. I told you the first domino had fallen. She stood and walked toward the large window overlooking downtown Chicago. The market is smarter than families. Families protect egos. The market protects results. She turned back toward me. Do you know what happened today? Dylan lost a client. She shook her head. No. He lost credibility. And that's much harder to recover. She opened a drawer and removed a thin blue folder. Inside were incorporation documents. I frowned. What is this? I had them prepared months ago. The company name was printed across the first page. Sentinel Operations Group. I looked up. You planned this. I prepared for the possibility. You decide whether it becomes reality. I slowly turned another page. Office lease. Insurance. Corporate registration. Technology infrastructure. Everything was ready. Months before my father's speech, Margaret studied my expression. I wasn't waiting for More Logistics to collapse. I was waiting for you to stop saving it. Back at headquarters, the damage was spreading faster than anyone expected. Word about Northbridge's meeting had already reached other clients. Sales representatives spent the afternoon answering uncomfortable questions they couldn't answer. Managers stopped defending Vanessa in private conversations. For years, they had believed Amber would always step in before things became irreversible. Now, that certainty was gone. Late that afternoon, Ethan called again. His voice was almost calm. Harrison just sent an email. What does it say? He thanked us for the meeting. I waited. And he canceled every ongoing negotiation with More Logistics. Another pause. Then Ethan added the sentence that made even Margaret smile. He also requested a private meeting. Tomorrow morning. Not with Dylan. Not with Vanessa. Only with you. I arrived at Northbridge's headquarters 10 minutes early. Not because I wanted to impress Harrison Whitaker. Because being prepared had become second nature years ago. The receptionist led me into a glass conference room overlooking downtown Chicago. There were no photographers, no lawyers, no dramatic presentations. Just Harrison, a notebook, and 2 cups of coffee. He stood to shake my hand. I've wanted to meet you for years. I smiled politely. You've known my name longer than I knew yours. He laughed. That's usually how the best operators work. Invisible, effective, undervalued. He didn't waste time. For the last 5 years, every major disruption involving More Logistics ended exactly the same way. He opened a binder. You solved it. He slid dozens of incident summaries across the table. Each one ended with my name. Each one represented a disaster my family had never even mentioned after it was over. They celebrated profits. You prevented losses. Those aren't the same skill. For the first time since leaving More Logistics, someone understood exactly what I had spent years doing. Not because I explained it, because he had done his homework. Harrison leaned forward. I'm not offering you a job. That caught my attention. I'm offering you something much larger. He opened another folder. Inside was a market analysis covering nearly every logistics provider in the Midwest. 3 companies were highlighted: More Logistics, Northbridge, and one space, still empty. We're creating a strategic operations company. He looked directly at me. I don't need another executive. I need someone capable of building what your family never appreciated. I remained silent. He continued. You choose the team. You build the systems. You decide how it operates. We finance it. No inflated promises. No exaggerated numbers. Just confidence. Then he said something that completely changed the conversation. I've already spoken to 6 companies. They're willing to follow you. Not More Logistics. Me. Across town, More Logistics looked nothing like it had 3 days earlier. Phones no longer rang with new contracts. They rang with questions, concerns, complaints. Inside the operations department, employees spoke in whispers whenever Vanessa walked by. Every meeting produced another problem. Every solution created 2 more. By lunchtime, another regional distributor had suspended negotiations until the company completed an independent operational review. Vanessa threw the report across the conference table. "This is Amber. She's poisoning the market." No one answered, because everyone knew Amber hadn't spoken to a single client. Reality was doing that on its own. Dylan rubbed his forehead. This wouldn't be happening if she had simply done her job. Ethan couldn't stay quiet anymore. "She did." The room froze. Dylan slowly looked up. "What did you say?" "I said, she did her job. For 6 years. We're only seeing these failures because she stopped covering them." Silence exploded across the room. Vanessa stood abruptly. "So now everyone suddenly worships Amber?" "No," Ethan answered calmly. "We're finally noticing what she was carrying." That afternoon, Cadence called me 12 times. I answered on the 13th. "Amber." She sounded exhausted. "We need to talk. You've had 31 years. This is different." "No. It's exactly the same." She ignored my answer. "Your father isn't sleeping. Vanessa hasn't eaten. Our family is falling apart." I stared through the window of Margaret's office. "Our family fell apart long before this week. You just didn't notice because I kept holding it together." She became quiet, then tried another strategy. "What will people think if they find out you're abandoning your own parents?" I almost laughed. They already watched Dad call me his biggest mistake. They know exactly who abandoned whom. Her breathing became heavier. "So that's it? You're getting revenge?" "No. I'm accepting your decision. You said Vanessa deserved everything. So let her have everything." I ended the call before she could answer. Margaret looked up from her paperwork. "Guilt." I nodded. It never works once someone finally discovers self-respect. By the end of the afternoon, the rumors had escaped Chicago. Industry newsletters began mentioning Northbridge's suspended partnership. Anonymous posts appeared questioning more logistics' internal stability. Vanessa made the worst possible decision. Instead of fixing the operation, she posted a polished video on social media. She smiled at the camera inside her new mansion. Leadership isn't about listening to negativity. It's about confidence. Comments flooded in within minutes. Most weren't supportive. Employees, former clients, retired managers, even vendors. For years they had remained silent. Now, they weren't protecting the Moore family anymore. One comment quickly spread across every platform. "Confidence doesn't move freight. Competence does." Vanessa deleted it. Hundreds more appeared. She disabled comments. Screenshots continued spreading anyway. That evening, I returned to my apartment carrying a folder Harrison had given me. Inside were preliminary partnership agreements. Nothing had been signed. Everything was possible. For the first time in years, my future wasn't tied to cleaning up someone else's disasters. I had just unlocked my front door when someone knocked. 3 slow knocks. Deliberate. Heavy. I already knew who it was before looking through the peephole. Dylan. Not wearing his expensive suit. Not smiling. Not surrounded by executives. Just standing alone in the hallway. For the first time in my life, my father hadn't come to give an order. He had come because he no longer had anyone else capable of saving him. And neither of us knew that the next 5 minutes were about to change the rest of our lives. I opened the door. Dylan didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped inside as though he still owned every room I stood in. His eyes scanned my apartment. Small. Organized. Quiet. Nothing expensive. Nothing extravagant. He looked disappointed. "As successful as you claim to be. I expected more." I closed the door behind him. "You didn't come here to judge my furniture." "No. I came because you're done proving your point." I didn't answer. He mistook my silence for hesitation. "Enough people have been embarrassed. You've made your little statement. It's time to come back." "Not. Please. Not. We need you." Just another order. As though nothing had changed. I remained standing. "You gave the company to Vanessa." "I did." "You removed my authority." "I did." "You called me your biggest mistake." He looked away for the first time. "People say things." "No. They prepare speeches." The words landed harder than I expected. He had no answer. Instead, he reached into his jacket and placed a folder on the kitchen counter. "Your executive access. I had IT restore it." "I don't want it." "You haven't even opened it." "I don't need to." His patience began disappearing. "This isn't about feelings. This is business." I almost smiled. For 6 years you insisted I wasn't part of the business. Now suddenly I am." His jaw tightened. "The company needs stability." "No. The company needs accountability." Silence settled between us. Then, for the first time in years, I watched certainty disappear from my father's face. He changed strategies. You know what happens if more logistics collapses. Hundreds of employees lose their jobs. "There it is." He frowned. "What?" "The guilt. You've always used other people to make me fix your decisions. This isn't manipulation." "It is." "You just ran out of better arguments." He took a slow breath. "The bank called this afternoon." I said nothing. "They're reviewing our credit facilities." Still nothing. "If they reduce our operating line, payroll becomes difficult." I looked directly at him. "You should probably tell your CEO." His expression hardened again. "Vanessa is learning. Employees aren't classrooms. They're people's lives." Another silence. Then his voice became colder. "You owe this family." That sentence erased whatever sympathy I might have felt. "I owe this family. You lived because of us. I worked because of me. You lived in our house. I earned every dollar you refused to pay me. You exaggerate." I walked to a drawer, pulled out a thin notebook, opened the first page. Every date, every emergency, every weekend, every overnight system recovery, every canceled vacation, every unpaid hour. 6 years. I slid it across the counter. I stopped counting after 11,000 hours. He stared at the pages, didn't touch them, didn't deny them, because he couldn't. When Dylan finally left, he looked older than when he had arrived. Not remorseful, just exhausted, the kind of exhaustion people feel when reality refuses to obey them. As the elevator doors closed behind him, my phone rang. "Margaret, how did it go?" "He still thinks authority works." "It won't for much longer." She paused. "Harrison is waiting." "For what?" "For your answer." The following morning, I walked into Northbridge's headquarters again. This time, there were more people in the conference room. Harrison, Margaret, Luca Jones, and several board members. No celebration, no speeches, just documents. Luca pushed the first agreement toward me. Sentinel Operations Group. Official articles of incorporation. Ownership structure. Operating agreements. Everything had already been reviewed. Everything was ready. Margaret quietly folded her hands. "Once you sign, there's no going back." I looked down at the company name. For years, every major decision of my life had revolved around protecting the Moore name. Now, for the first time, I had the chance to build something that belonged entirely to me. Not because my parents allowed it, because they had pushed me toward it. I signed. One signature. Less than 5 seconds. 6 years of silence. Ended with a single line of ink. Harrison smiled. "Welcome home." While I was signing those papers, Moore Logistics was losing control by the hour. Another client postponed contract renewal. A regional warehouse requested independent oversight before shipping resumed. Insurance providers demanded updated operational certifications. Then, just before noon, the human resources director entered Dylan's office carrying 3 resignation letters. Not from junior employees, from senior managers, people who had spent decades inside the company. "They're leaving?" Dylan asked. The HR director nodded. "They've accepted positions elsewhere." "Where?" She hesitated, then quietly placed another folder on his desk. The first resignation, Operations Manager. Destination, Sentinel Operations Group. The second, Director of Compliance. Same destination. The third, Cybersecurity Lead. Same destination. Dylan stared at the pages without blinking. For years, those people had stayed because they trusted one person. Not the Moore family. Amber. Before he could process it, his assistant rushed into the office without knocking. She looked pale. "There are 5 CEOs on line 1. They're refusing to speak with Vanessa. They're refusing to speak with you." Dylan slowly stood. "What do they want?" The assistant swallowed. "They said, if Amber Moore is no longer with Moore Logistics, they'd rather wait until Sentinel Operations Group opens its doors." The conference room overlooking downtown Chicago felt strangely quiet. No celebration. No champagne. No photographers waiting for the perfect headline. Only people who understood exactly how much work had been required to reach that morning. The incorporation documents rested in front of me. Beside them, the first operational agreements, the first client transfers, the first employee contracts. Everything had happened faster than anyone expected. Not because Sentinel Operations Group had stolen business, because the market had finally discovered where the value had always been. Harrison looked around the room before speaking. I've spent 30 years watching companies fail. They rarely collapse because of competition. They collapse because they mistake loyalty for dependence. His eyes met mine. More Logistics believed you needed them. The truth was exactly the opposite. The first agreement slid across the table. Northbridge. Signed. Then another. A regional pharmaceutical distributor. Signed. Then another. A national medical supplier. Signed. Every signature represented years of trust. Trust that had never belonged to the Moore name. It had belonged to the person who solved problems without asking for recognition. Across the city, Moore Logistics had become almost unrecognizable. Conference rooms that once hosted expansion meetings were now filled with bankers, attorneys, and auditors. The atmosphere wasn't hopeful anymore. It was defensive. The bank had officially reduced the company's operating credit. Insurance premiums had increased overnight. 3 more senior managers had resigned before lunch. The board demanded explanations. There weren't any. Vanessa refused to accept reality. This is sabotage. They're conspiring against us. No one answered. Even Dylan remained silent. For the first time, he had stopped defending her. Not because he had finally understood, because facts had become impossible to argue with. A board member quietly pushed a financial projection across the table. If current clients continue leaving, the company becomes insolvent within 6 months. Nobody challenged the numbers. Everyone knew they were optimistic. That afternoon, Cadence asked to meet me. Not at the office, not at my apartment. At a small restaurant halfway between both companies, she arrived 10 minutes early. Without makeup, without designer jewelry, without the polished confidence she had carried my entire life. She looked tired, older. She didn't order anything. Neither did I. For several seconds, she simply stared at the table, then quietly said, "I should have stopped him." It was the closest thing to accountability I had ever heard from her. But it still wasn't enough. "You didn't just stay silent. You participated." She closed her eyes. "I know. No. You finally know." Another long silence settled between us. I thought protecting Vanessa was protecting the family. You weren't protecting the family. You were choosing one daughter and sacrificing the other. She couldn't deny it, because every memory proved it. Every birthday, every graduation, every promotion, every family dinner. The pattern had always been there. She simply expected me to accept it forever. Finally, she whispered, "Can you forgive us?" I looked at her calmly. I stopped waiting for an apology years ago. What I needed was freedom. I stood, left enough money to pay for both meals, and walked away. She never asked me to come back. For the first time, she knew I wouldn't. 2 weeks later, Sentinel Operations Group officially opened its headquarters. It wasn't the largest building in Chicago. It didn't need to be. Every person inside had chosen to be there. Not because of my last name, because they believed in the way we worked. Margaret quietly watched employees settling into their offices. "You know what your father never understood?" I smiled. "He thought leadership came from ownership." She nodded. "You built loyalty. He bought obedience. Those are never the same." Before I could answer, Luca walked into my office carrying a tablet. "The court finalized the filings this morning." He handed it to me. Moore Logistics had entered court-supervised financial restructuring. Not bankruptcy yet, but close enough that every industry publication was already reporting it. A few minutes later, my phone vibrated. A news alert. Moore Logistics loses 4th major client as industry confidence falls. There was no mention of me. I preferred it that way. The story had never been about humiliating my family in public. It had been about refusing to carry people who spent years convincing me I had no value. Late that afternoon, I stood in front of the large glass wall overlooking our operations floor. Employees moved confidently between departments. Phones rang. Meetings happened. Problems were solved. Without chaos. Without shouting. Without fear. Harrison stopped beside me. Any regrets? I thought about the ballroom, about the mansion keys, about hearing my father call me his biggest mistake while hundreds of people laughed. Then I thought about everything that happened afterward. The clients, the employees, the company we had built, the life I finally owned. I smiled. Only one. He looked at me. I spent 6 years trying to prove I had value. I watched another team meeting begin below us. I should have believed it the first time I saved them. Months earlier, my father had stood on a stage and announced that I was the biggest mistake he had ever made. In the end, he lost his company, his reputation, his most trusted employees, and every client who had trusted his name. Not because I destroyed him, because the moment I stopped saving him, the truth finally had room to speak. And for the first time in my life, being Amber Moore no longer meant carrying someone else's future. It meant building my own.